Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm your host today, Val Pettigras. And with me, representing the 89th Assembly District, which includes Westchester County, is Assemblyman Bob Castelli. And the last time that we left off, we talked about the session overview for legislative session 2011, and we were discussing the property tax cap and mandate relief and how crucial that is. Let's talk about exactly what those mandates are, because I know that a lot of people may not be familiar with the term mandate or unfunded mandate. Sure. or all of that. You get a lot of inside baseball terms here. Why don't you explain?
Okay. Basically, a mandate is something that is created as a result of legislative action, and it requires by law, in other words, someone is mandated by law to engage in that type of action. Now, it becomes an unfunded mandate when we in the state pass this and then fail to provide the funding for it. So the municipality, the town, the city, village, whatever, is now required by law to engage in this conduct. They have no alternative, but they do not have the funding provided along with it. So once again, Albany makes the law, puts it on the back of the local jurisdiction, and that jurisdiction then has to scramble to come up with the money to get it. And of course, usually the way they do it is by a tax increase.
And of course, the last time that we got together, we talked about the fact that a great example is inviting someone to dinner, telling them what they're going to order, and then sticking them with the tab. That kind of simplifies it for people out there so that they know, hey, wait a minute, that's not right.
Absolutely, and it isn't fair. And it's something that has been indigenous to Albany politics for many, many years. When you're a legislator, what do? You legislate. If you're a hammer, every problem is a nail. Okay, well, if you're a legislator, every problem we see, we try to fix with a law because it's the only autonomy that we have. I would be very much in favor if we had to repeal one law for every law we pass. We'd probably have the state operating better.
It just seems as though the more simplified the laws are, the easier they are to interpret. And I understand that you can't legislate common sense, but sometimes some of the things or the bills that are passed here in Albany just contradict any type of logic whatsoever.
Well, I find myself doing that all the time, which is confusing the issue with logic. I look at some of the bills here and think to myself, well, here is a ridiculous solution to a non-existent problem. But, in the legislature, and it's important for people to recognize, in the legislature, in both houses of the legislature, in a typical legislative session between both houses, we may put forth as many as 10,000 potential bills to become law. Of that, about 600 of them will pass both houses, and probably at the end of the day, maybe 250 or slightly less or more will actually be enacted into law. So while there are plenty of good ideas out there, thankfully everything doesn't get legislated because you wouldn't be able to breathe without violating the law if we did so.
Well, it seems as though there's always a cost to these pieces of legislation that's not taken into account.
Well, there is a cost. And the other thing you need to always remember, and I've learned this kind of quickly when I came up here, was, you see a problem, you say, okay, here's the problem. We can create legislation to fix the problem. But what you have to be careful about is being concerned with the unintended consequence. You may have a simple problem with what appears to be a simple solution, another legal mandate, and then in so doing, you've now created a much bigger problem than the original problem was, and now you're stuck with it, and it can't be repealed.
Welcome to government.
Amen to that one. That's government in action, and inaction is our middle name.
Getting back to those mandates, some of them involve things like the MTA payroll tax or the pension costs. Which one of those would you like to explore first?
Well, I think, both of them go hand in hand because when we look at the mandate relief, as you know, in this enacted budget, we had about $127 million in mandate relief. Now, that's a drop in the bucket. It was as much as the governor and the legislature could come together with to do it within the time frame that we had, and we had a time constraint. So it is a work in progress. We probably need 5 to 10 times that. But in essence, what we did was we created $127 million in mandate relief, whereby we are relieving local jurisdictions of those $127 million in expenses. What we need moving forward is both short and long-term mandate relief. Long-term mandate relief we are considering now in the form of a Tier 6 pension system for the state employees. Now, that Tier 6 pension system, just to give you an idea, along with Tier 5, which we instituted 2 years ago, collectively will be $130 billion savings, I'm sorry, $90 billion savings out of our $130 billion budget. So $90 billion projected over 30 years. Well, that's the good news. The bad news is until we enact Tier 6 and we start hiring people under it, the amount of money we're saving doesn't start to kick in. So what we needed now was short-term mandate relief. And that mandate relief can come to us in a number of forms. One is with the Wicks law. The Wicks law is that law which requires, 5 prime contractors to bid on any particular job. So if the local town wants to put up a shed that you and I could put up from Home Depot in 4 hours, they got to get 5 prime contractors in, and of course it increased the cost of doing everything.
It doesn't make any sense, and it just seems as though it's a classic example of too many cooks spoiling the soup.
Well, exactly. And I think, this is one of those deals where the legislative intent was flawless, but the practical application left a lot to be desired. The original reason for the law was to make sure there was no hanky-panky. No bid rigging, no fixing of prices, no throwing contracts to the wrong person. So you had competitive bidding in a request for proposal. But the practical aspect of this was we ended up creating too many layers of this to do a very simple project where you could go with somebody who was a local person, submit 1, 2, or 3 bids instead of 5 bids, and make this a much simpler project for a much lower cost.
And this is what I'm talking about. We're discussing pensions right now, and we're discussing mandates. But then it goes into the area of ethics. And why do we have to legislate for ethics? I mean, this is some of what I'm talking about with common sense, and yet we had to. As a matter of fact, we're going to take a look at Assemblyman Castelli on the floor of Chamber as he talks about ethics reform.
I think this bill goes a long way to do something that I think we all realize needed to be done for many, many years now. And I am enthusiastic to see it pass. I will support it, and I will encourage my colleagues to support it, but I would like to see all segments of our society included. So it does not appear that the tail, being the unions, wags the dog, which is the legislature. Instead, it works properly, that we make the law and it blankets everybody under the same mantle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And that was something that was a very hot topic this past session. And how many times did we see exactly the scenarios that you were just describing about elected officials getting themselves in a lot of hot water because they did not execute good judgment?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a reason we put erasers on pencils. We all make mistakes. But the fact of the matter is those of us who are fortunate enough to hold high public office are granted by we the people a higher level of authority. And that begets both a higher level of responsibility and accountability. And that's the way it should be. The laws that we passed this year, which I'm very pleased with because it very much mirrored 2 bills that I put in the last 2 years successively and never got out of committee, but I put them in anyway, mirrored the Brennan Center's justice recommendation report for what we needed in the way of ethics reform. And one of the things that they did was they required all of the lawmakers to disclose all sources of outside income. As you know, we have many lawmakers who, for instance, are attorneys. And they may be of counsel to a particular law firm or a particular counsel to an entity that may end up representing the union that they in turn now have to vote on a bill for or against. So there's potential conflicts of interest that may or may not be easy to see either by them or anybody else, but this is going to make it a requirement so a separate oversight body will be able to look at it. We also passed another law that indicated a public official who's convicted of a felony shouldn't get a pension from the state of New York.
Doesn't that just rub you the wrong way? I mean,
someone's sitting in jail collecting a New York State pension because they were a crook.
Doesn't make any sense. And why do we have a law like that in place to begin with?
Well, I mean, it's an outrage that it happens. It is long overdue that we finally passed it. It's sad that we have to have laws like this because obviously public officials will get into trouble and they'll break the law. And if they break the law, they need to be held to that higher standard. But they certainly shouldn't be rewarded with a pension for having committed a felony in a performance of their duty because that's ridiculous.
Switching gears for a moment, the issue of redistricting has come up time and time again, but it really isn't something that's been focused on because so many other issues were in the spotlight this legislative session. And are you concerned about how the lines are going to be redrawn and whether it'll be done by an independent committee and whether the lines will be fair?
I think all of us are concerned about that. You know, early on, I got on the bandwagon of independent redistricting, and former Mayor Koch, who I have great respect for, endorsed me as one of his champions of reform. You know, hero of reform because of independent redistricting. I believe in it. I think it's the way it should be. I think the districts should be drawn independently. Having said that, I happened to serve a district that had been gerrymandered. And ironically, in one of the ironies,
And I want to stop you right there because, again, we're talking inside baseball terms.
Sure.
And it's not to treat our audience as though they don't know anything, but I know that you hear things like filibuster or gerrymandering, and you might not know exactly what it means.
Sure.
What does
Well,
gerrymandering
basically,
mean?
what a gerrymander does is, and it was named after a legislature, you know, who was notorious for doing this once upon a time. But basically what it does, it redraws the district map to the advantage of either one party's candidate or another, and usually it's done by the party in control of that particular house. My district was gerrymandered a decade ago, and as a result of which it went from basically about a 50-50 district and shifted the paradigm to where it was a 60-40 district. Now, I've gotten elected twice in that district. It's my honor to represent Republicans and Democrats alike. I don't see it as an issue with me serving the people because you may run politically, but you serve apolitically, and I'd like to hope that people see that I'm trying to do that. But from the standpoint of absolute fairness, what you need is basically districts that are cut in such a way that they are both contiguous to each other, that they represent the same type of populations. In other words, you can't have an inner city area and a ghetto area with an upper middle class suburban neighborhood because the two areas are going to be different. The needs will be different. It's going to be harder to serve them. Having said that, I represent probably the most diverse district in the whole state. I've got a city, I've got an airport, I've got Fortune 500 companies, I've got 4,700 rent-controlled apartments, and yet I have horse farms and farm bureau issues in the northern part of my district, and some of the wealthiest people in the world living there.
So when do you think that this will be addressed? Do you think that there will be a special session held to, start to address this issue?
I'm not sure about a special session yet. I do know that about a week and a half ago, I testified in White Plains before the legislative redistricting committee. They are holding hearings throughout the state. They're public hearings, but I would encourage anyone to go if you find that they are being held in your area. And basically, we testified before members of both houses from both sides of the aisle who are assigned to these committees to determine what will be done with redistricting, and everybody's input was taken into account. How it will be, I don't know, but I anticipate that in probably late November or December, we will start to see the districting maps come out, and then we will probably have more redistricting hearings going into the session to resolve what the districts will be.
And is it a good idea to have individuals appointed by the legislature to serve on this independent committee?
Well, there's the argument, can you police yourself? And I would argue that you're better off being policed by people who are independent and outside of the influence area of either of these two houses. I incorporate myself into that. Obviously, human nature is such that you're going to do what you can to take care of your own situation and those who are your friends, okay? Well, we eliminate that if we have independent redistricting. If we had an independently appointed redistricting commission that did this, that was nonpartisan, we'd probably end up with better districts all the way around.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, but we do have time to let you out there know how to reach your representative. Please contact Assemblyman Castelli at 4 New King Street, Suite 125, White Plains, 10604, or give him a call at 914-686-7335, or you can contact him at his email address. It has been a pleasure having you on the show. I look forward to more spirited discussions in the upcoming months regarding legislative issues, and we hope that you will join us for our next edition of Assembly Calendar.